The midday sun was hanging high in the sky, shining down brightly on the busy city streets. It was the kind of day that felt heavy and warm, where the air seemed to stand still. For most people, the sunshine was nice. They walked along the sidewalks wearing light clothes, sipping on cold drinks, and looking at their phones. But for Martha, the sun was just one more thing to endure. She was 87 years old, and the heat made her bones ache. It made her feel tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Martha walked slowly. Her steps were small and careful. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days. The fabric was thin, and there were small patches on the elbows where the cloth had worn away. On her feet were old sneakers that were starting to come apart at the soles. But she didn't complain. Complaining took energy, and she needed all her energy to keep moving. In her left hand, she carried two large, heavy plastic bags. The handles were digging deep into her palm, making red grooves in her skin. Inside those bags was everything she owned in the world. A few extra changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a thin blanket for when the night got cold, and some wrapped biscuits she had saved from a kind shopkeeper earlier that morning. The bags were not just heavy, they were her life. She couldn't put them down, not here, not in the middle of the crowded sidewalk. In her right hand, she held onto something much more precious. She held the small, soft hand of her 4-year-old granddaughter, Lily. Lily was a tiny girl with pigtails that bounced when she walked. She wore a yellow t-shirt that was a little too big for her and pink shorts that had faded to a soft pastel color. Unlike her grandmother, Lily didn't look tired. She looked around with big, wide eyes, watching the cars go by and listening to the loud noises of the city. "Nana, I'm thirsty," Lily said softly, looking up. Martha squeezed the little hand gently. "I know, little one. Just a little bit further. We will find a water fountain soon." Martha's voice was raspy and dry, but she tried to keep it sounding cheerful. She didn't want Lily to worry. Worrying was for grown-ups, or at least, it was for people who had a home to worry about. Right now, they just had to survive the day. They moved through the crowd like two small fish swimming upstream. People walked very fast. Everyone was in a hurry to get somewhere important. They were dressed in suits and ties, or nice office clothes. They carried briefcases and cups of hot coffee. Most of them didn't even look down. If they didn't look down, they didn't have to see Martha. They didn't have to see the tired old lady with the heavy bags and the little girl. It was strange, Martha thought, how you could be surrounded by thousands of people and still feel completely alone. The city was loud. Cars honked their horns. Buses roared as they pulled away from the curb. Music thumped from open windows of passing cars, but none of that noise was for her. She was just a ghost floating through the noise. Her feet were hurting. She had been walking since dawn. They had left the park early because the security guards had asked them to move along. They weren't allowed to sleep on the benches anymore. So, they walked. They walked to kill time. They walked to find a place where they wouldn't be in the way. "Look, Nana. A doggy." Lily pointed excitedly. Martha stopped for a second to catch her breath and looked where Lily was pointing. A man was walking a fluffy white dog. The dog was pulling on its leash, eager to sniff at a fire hydrant. "Yes, that is a nice dog," Martha said. She tried to smile, but her face felt stiff. Lily was good at finding happy things. She found joy in a pigeon pecking at a crumb. She found wonder in a shiny penny on the ground. Martha wished she could see the world the way Lily did. Martha only saw the dirt on the sidewalk and the miles of concrete stretching out in front of them. They kept walking. The plastic bags swung back and forth, bumping against Martha's legs. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull pain. She knew she needed to stop. She needed to sit down, just for 5 minutes. But finding a place to sit in the city was harder than it seemed. The benches near the shops were usually full. People sat on them eating their lunches, talking on their phones, or just resting their own tired legs. Sometimes, if Martha sat down on a bench, people would move away. They would give her looks that made her feel small. They didn't say anything, but their eyes said, "You don't belong here." So, Martha usually tried to find a spot that was out of the way. She would look for a low wall or a step. But today, her feet were really hurting. She felt a sharp pain in her lower back every time she took a step. She looked ahead, scanning the street for somewhere safe. Suddenly, the pavement opened up into a large plaza. It was a wide, open space surrounded by tall glass buildings that sparkled in the sun. In the middle of the plaza, there was a patch of green grass and some trees. It looked like an island of calm in the middle of the storm. Martha's heart lifted a little. Maybe there would be a bench there. Maybe they could rest in the shade for a while. She gently tugged on Lily's hand. "Come on, love. Let's go over there," Martha said. They walked across the street when the light changed. The cars waited for them, their engines rumbling impatiently. Martha moved as fast as she could, shuffling her feet to make it to the other side before the signal changed. When they reached the plaza, the air felt a little bit cooler. The shade from the buildings offered a break from the direct sun. Martha looked around. There were people here, too, but it wasn't as crowded as the sidewalk. There were office workers sitting on the grass eating sandwiches. There were delivery guys taking a break on their bikes. And there, near the center of the plaza, Martha saw it. It wasn't a bench. It was something much better. Sitting alone in the open air was a shiny, upright piano. It was painted a bright, cheerful color, maybe red or blue, though Martha's eyes weren't sharp enough to tell the exact shade anymore. It was just sitting there, waiting for someone to play it. A small sign was taped to the front, but Martha was too far away to read it. She didn't need to read it to know what it was for. Cities did this sometimes. They put pianos in public places so people could play music. It was meant to bring art to the streets. Martha stopped walking. She stared at the piano. It had been a long time, years, maybe since she had touched a piano. She used to play when she was younger. She used to play in her living room, with the windows open, letting the breeze carry the music out to the garden. That felt like a different life now. That was before she lost her home. Before the world got too expensive and too fast. But looking at the piano now, she felt a pull. It wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a piece of her past. And more importantly, it had a bench. A sturdy, wooden bench that looked very inviting. "Lily, look," Martha said, pointing with her chin. "A piano." Lily followed her finger. "What's a piano?" "It is an instrument that makes music," Martha explained. "You press the keys, and it sings." Lily's eyes lit up. "Can we make it sing?" Martha looked down at her granddaughter. Lily looked so hopeful. She wasn't asking for a toy or an ice cream cone. She just wanted to hear something beautiful. And Martha wanted to sit down. She wanted to rest her weary legs and feel the cool wood of a bench under her for a moment. "We can try," Martha said. But we have to be gentle. It doesn't belong to us. Martha adjusted her grip on the plastic bags. They felt heavier than ever, but the thought of sitting down gave her a burst of energy. She steered Lily toward the piano. As they got closer, Martha noticed that no one was using it. People were walking past it, glancing at it, but ignoring it. They were too busy with their phones and their conversations. The piano sat silent, waiting for a pair of hands to bring it to life. Martha walked up to it slowly. She felt a little nervous. She looked at her hands. They were wrinkled and spotted with age. The skin was paper thin. Her knuckles were swollen. She wondered if her fingers would still work. She wondered if she could even press the keys down hard enough to make a sound. She reached the piano and stood in front of it for a moment. She looked around the plaza. A few people were watching them, curious about the old woman and the small child approaching the instrument. Martha tried to ignore them. She didn't want to see the judgment in their eyes. She just wanted to rest. "Okay, Lily," Martha said softly. "Let's put the bags down." She carefully lowered the heavy plastic bags to the ground. As soon as they left her hands, her shoulders felt light, almost weightless. She rolled her shoulders back, trying to loosen the tight muscles. "Sit here, sweetie," Martha said, patting the bench. Lily climbed up. The bench was high for her little legs, so she had to hop a bit. Once she was up, she swung her legs back and forth, looking at the black and white keys with fascination. "What do I do?" Lily asked, hovering her hands over the keys. "Just watch me first," Martha said. Martha took a deep breath. She slowly lowered herself onto the bench next to Lily. The wood was hard, but to Martha, it felt like the most comfortable chair in the world. She closed her eyes for just a second, letting her body relax. The noise of the city faded away. She opened her eyes and looked at the keys. They were clean and white, with black keys set in between them. They looked like old friends. Martha hesitated. She felt a lump in her throat. It had been so long. She was afraid she would sound terrible. She was afraid people would laugh. But then she felt a small hand pat her on the arm. She looked at Lily. The little girl was smiling at her, a smile full of trust and love. Lily didn't care if Martha was the best player in the world. She just wanted to be with her Nana. Martha smiled back. She lifted her hands. Her fingers shook slightly, but she steadied them. She wasn't thinking about being homeless anymore. She wasn't thinking about her heavy bags or the hunger in her stomach. She was just thinking about the music. She placed her right hand on the keys. The plastic was cool and smooth under her fingertips. She took another deep breath, filling her lungs with the city air. She wasn't going to play a song yet. She just wanted to say hello. Martha pressed down on the middle C key. A clear, bright note rang out. It cut through the noise of the traffic and the chatter of the crowd. It was a single, pure sound. To Martha, it sounded like hope. It sounded like a voice saying, "I am still here." She sat there for a moment, listening to the note fade into the air, ready to play whatever melody came into her heart. Martha kept her finger pressed on that single key, listening as the sound floated up into the air and then slowly disappeared. It was a clean, solid sound. For a moment, the chaotic noise of the city, the honking cars, the shouting people, the sirens seemed to stop. It was just her, Lily, and that one note. She looked down at her hands. They looked so strange resting on the pristine white keys. Her skin was thin and pale, mapped with blue veins and dark spots that came with age. Her knuckles were swollen and red, aching from the cold nights and the weight of the plastic bags she carried every day. These hands were meant for holding onto bags, or for wrapping a blanket around a small child. They were rough and tired. But as she flexed her fingers, she felt a ghost of a memory. She remembered when these hands were smooth and young. She remembered sitting at a big, dark piano in her own living room many, many years ago. The sun used to stream through the window and illuminate the dust dancing in the air while she played. Back then, the music would fill the house, and her husband would smile from his armchair. That life felt like a dream now, something that happened to a different person. Lily sat beside her, swinging her legs back and forth. The bench was high, and her feet didn't touch the ground. She watched Martha's hands with wide, curious eyes. "Are you going to sing?" Nana Lily asked in her small, sweet voice. Martha smiled, a gentle crinkling of the skin around her eyes. "No, sweetie. The piano is going to sing for us. I just have to help it." Martha took a deep breath. She ignored the people walking past them. She ignored the young man in the suit who was looking at his phone while walking dangerously close to the bench. She blocked out the world. She focused entirely on the feeling of the keys beneath her fingertips. She started to move her hand. It was a slow movement. Her fingers didn't jump or run like they used to, they walked carefully. She found the next note, and then the next. It wasn't a song yet, just a simple scale, a way of warming up. Do, re, mi, fa, sol. The notes were a little shaky at first. Her right hand felt stiff, like a rusty hinge that hadn't been oiled in a long time. She worried that her fingers wouldn't listen to her brain. But as she played the simple pattern, the blood seemed to flow a little easier into her fingertips. The stiffness began to fade away, replaced by a warm sensation. She felt a sudden rush of confidence. It was surprising. After so many years of feeling invisible, of feeling like she had nothing left to give, here she was, creating something beautiful. She shifted her body slightly to get more comfortable. The hardwood of the bench pressed against her back, but she didn't mind. She placed her left hand on the lower keys. Now, both hands were ready. She closed her eyes for a second to picture the music in her head. It was an old piece, something classical and deep. It was a song that required you to feel the sadness in order to play it right. And Martha knew sadness better than anyone. She began to play in earnest. The first chord rang out, rich and full. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate right through the wooden bench and into Martha's bones. It was a minor chord, serious and heavy. Then, her right hand began to play a melody. It was slow and haunting, like a voice calling out in the night. The music wasn't perfect. Her timing was a little slow, and some of the notes weren't as crisp as they would have been 50 years ago. But there was something else there, something that perfect technique couldn't buy. There was emotion in every press of the key. It was the sound of loneliness, but also of survival. It was the sound of a woman who had seen the world change and had kept going anyway. Lily stopped swinging her legs. She went very still. She had never heard a sound like this before. It wasn't like the catchy songs on the radio or the fast music from the ice cream truck. This music felt like a story. She leaned in closer to Martha, resting her head against her grandmother's arm. The contrast between them was striking. To anyone watching, it was a scene that could break your heart. On one side was Martha, 87 years old, wearing her faded dress, her face a map of hard times, her hands moving with a slow, heavy grace. On the other side was Lily, 4 years old, small and bright, wearing her yellow t-shirt, looking at the keys as if they were magic. Around them, the atmosphere of the plaza began to change. At first, people just walked by. They were in a hurry. They had meetings to get to and emails to answer. They heard the piano, but it was just background noise, like the wind or the traffic. But then, the melody started to weave its way into their consciousness. It was sad but beautiful. It was the kind of sound that makes you stop and think about something you lost a long time ago. A young woman walking a dog slowed down. She was looking at her phone, but her head lifted up when she heard the music. She saw the old woman and the little girl. She pulled her dog gently to the side and stopped walking. She just stood there, listening. A few feet away, a man in a business suit was eating a sandwich on a concrete ledge. He was chewing mechanically, staring at the ground. The sound of the piano drifted over to him. He stopped chewing. He looked up, searching for the source of the music. When he saw Martha, his expression softened. He put the sandwich down in his lap and wiped his hands on a napkin, giving the music his full attention. More people began to pause. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. It was like the music had a gravitational pull. Two teenagers, who were laughing and joking loudly a moment ago, quieted down as they walked past. They exchanged a look and stepped off the sidewalk onto the grass, standing near the back of the growing crowd. No one said anything. It was as if the music demanded silence. It felt wrong to talk or laugh while such a serious song was being played. The city was usually a place where everyone talked at once, where noise was constant. But here, in this small circle around the piano, a quietness settled. Martha didn't notice any of this. Her eyes were closed again, her head tilted slightly to the side. She was lost in the music. She wasn't thinking about the plastic bags on the ground or where they were going to sleep that night. She wasn't worrying about the cold or the hunger. In her mind, she was back in her old house. She could see the curtains blowing in the wind. She could feel the presence of her loved ones who were long gone. The song was a nocturne, a piece written for the night. It had a flowing, rolling rhythm in the left hand, like waves crashing on a shore, and a singing, crying melody in the right hand. Martha's left hand played the rolling notes. It was difficult for her to stretch her fingers wide enough, but she managed. She concentrated hard, her forehead wrinkling with focus. She hit a difficult stretch of notes. For a second, her fingers fumbled. The music stumbled. A discordant sound rang out sharp and ugly. Martha's eyes snapped open. Panic flared in her chest. She felt a flush of embarrassment heat up her cheeks. She wanted to stop. She wanted to grab her bags and grab Lily and run away. She felt like a fraud. Who was she to think she could still play? She was just a homeless old lady making a mess of a beautiful song. She started to pull her hands back into her lap. The moment was broken. But then, she felt a small touch on her leg. She looked down. Lily had reached out. The little girl wasn't looking at Martha's face, she was looking at Martha's hands. She didn't care about the mistake. To her, the stumble was just part of the song. Lily tapped Martha's knee, a gentle signal to keep going. "Don't stop, Nana," Lily whispered. "It's pretty." Martha looked at her granddaughter's innocent face. There was no judgment there. Only love. Lily didn't know that the note was wrong. She only knew that she wanted the music to continue. Martha took a shaky breath. The embarrassment was still there, burning in her chest, but she pushed it down. She looked at the keys again. They were waiting. She realized that the music didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be real. She placed her hands back on the keys. She picked up the melody right where she left off, smoothing over the mistake as if it had never happened. The music flowed again, perhaps a little softer this time, a little more humble. The song continued to build. It swelled like the ocean tide. The notes were getting higher, more intense. Martha's body swayed slightly with the rhythm. The pain in her back and her arthritis seemed to fade into the background, drowned out by the sound. She was pouring her heart into the instrument. Every worry, every fear, every sleepless night was going into those keys. The crowd was larger now. There was a semicircle of people standing around the piano. Some were leaning against the low walls of the flower beds. Others were standing still on the pavement, blocking the path but not caring. A delivery cyclist had stopped his bike and was resting his feet on the curb, listening. They were all captivated. It wasn't just because an old woman was playing. It was because they could feel the emotion in the air. It was a raw, human moment in a world that often felt plastic and fake. They saw a grandmother sharing a piece of her soul with a child. Martha played the final phrases of the verse. The music slowed down. The notes became lower, deeper. She held onto the last chord, letting it ring out loudly before lifting her fingers. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a full one, packed with the feeling of the music. No one clapped yet, they just stood there, letting the sound settle in their ears. The city felt different now. It felt quieter, smaller. Martha opened her eyes and looked at her hands resting on the keys. She took a deep, ragged breath. She felt drained, but in a good way. Like she had let go of a heavy weight she had been carrying for years. She turned to look at Lily. Lily was beaming. She clapped her small hands together. Again. She said. Martha chuckled softly. My hands are tired, little one. Just for a minute. She looked up and saw the crowd for the first time. She saw the rows of strangers staring at her. For a second, the old fear came back, the fear of being chased away, of being told to move along. She braced herself, expecting a security guard to step forward or someone to yell. But no one moved. No one looked angry. They just looked at her with soft eyes. A few people smiled, small, encouraging smiles. The man with the sandwich nodded his head slowly, as if to say, "Thank you." Martha realized she didn't need to run. She sat up a little straighter on the bench. She wasn't just a homeless woman on a street corner anymore. Right now, she was a musician. And she had an audience. She flexed her fingers, feeling the warmth returning to them. She wasn't done playing yet. The piano was singing, and she wasn't ready to let it stop. The silence that hung in the air after the last note faded was heavy, but it wasn't a scary kind of heavy. It felt like a blanket had been dropped over the noisy city square. Usually, this place was a mess of sounds. Cars roared by on the street nearby, buses hissed when they stopped, and people shouted into their phones or laughed at jokes. But for a few seconds, all of that seemed to disappear. It was just the hum of the piano strings vibrating in the wooden box, dying down slowly. Martha sat very still on the bench. Her hands were resting in her lap now, fingers curled slightly inward. She felt a strange mix of feelings. On one hand, she felt proud. She had actually done it. She had played a song that people stopped to listen to. But on the other hand, she felt exposed. She was out in the open, with no walls to hide behind, wearing her old faded dress, with her life's possessions stuffed into plastic bags on the dirty ground next to her. She kept her eyes lowered, looking at the black and white keys. She was afraid to look up. She was afraid that if she looked at the crowd, the magic would break. She worried she would see annoyance on their faces, or people checking their watches, wondering why a homeless old woman was blocking their way. She waited for someone to say, "Move along," or "Let us sit there." But nobody said a word. Lily, sitting next to her, swung her legs happily. She didn't feel the tension that her grandmother did. To Lily, the music had just been a nice story, and now the story was paused. She looked at the crowd with a big, innocent smile, unaware that the situation was unusual. She kicked her feet against the bench, her sneakers making a soft thudding sound. Martha took a deep breath and finally lifted her head. She blinked a few times, adjusting to the brightness of the day. What she saw surprised her. The semicircle of people had grown larger. There were now maybe 30 or 40 people standing there. And they weren't looking at their phones. They weren't looking at their watches. They were looking at her. Their faces weren't full of the judgment she feared. Instead, they looked soft. Some people had their heads tilted to the side. A woman near the front had her hand pressed against her chest, right over her heart. A man in a delivery uniform had taken off his helmet and was holding it against his hip, just standing there. Martha felt a lump form in her throat. It had been so long since anyone looked at her with anything other than pity or annoyance. Strangers usually looked through her, as if she were a ghost. But now, they were seeing her. They were really seeing her. She felt a sudden spark of warmth in her chest. It wasn't the sun this time, it was something inside. She realized that the music had connected them. For 3 minutes, she wasn't a homeless person. She wasn't a burden on society. She was a musician. And they were the listeners. Martha looked back down at the keys. She wasn't ready to leave yet. Her hands, which had been trembling slightly from nervousness, suddenly felt steady. She wanted to give them more. She wanted to play another song, one that was even deeper. But as she flexed her fingers to start again, a sharp pain shot through her left wrist. It was a familiar, aching pain, the arthritis that had lived in her joints for years. It flared up like a hot needle. Martha gasped quietly and pulled her left hand back, shaking it gently to try and make the pain stop. She frowned. She wanted to play a complex piece, a song that needed both hands to dance together. But her left hand felt stiff and weak. The years of carrying heavy bags, of sleeping on the hard ground, and of pushing her body too far had taken their toll. Her fingers just wouldn't listen to what her brain wanted them to do. They felt like sausages attached to her palm, clumsy and slow. Martha let out a small, frustrated sigh. She felt the disappointment wash over her. She had their attention, but she didn't know if she could keep it. She was just too old. Her body was failing her, just like it did every other day. She looked at Lily. The little girl was watching Martha rub her wrist. "What's wrong, Nana?" Lily asked, her voice loud enough for the people in the front row to hear. "Nothing, sweetie," Martha whispered, trying to force a smile. "Grandma's hand is just a little tired today." Lily looked at the piano keys. Then she looked at her own small hands. She turned her palms over and stared at them, then back at the big instrument. She seemed to be thinking very hard. Martha tried to position her right hand to play something simple, just a melody with one hand, but she felt hesitant. It felt empty to play with just one hand. The music needed a bottom, a foundation, and her left hand just couldn't provide it today. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She didn't want to cry in front of all these people. She didn't want them to see her weakness. She was about to close the lid of the piano and stand up to leave when she felt a small nudge on her arm. Lily had scooted closer on the bench. She reached out her tiny hand and placed it on the piano keys, right next to where Martha's right hand was resting. "I can help," Lily said brightly. Martha looked at her, startled. "Oh, Lily, you don't know how to play." "It's okay. I can hit the loud ones," Lily insisted. She raised her hand high above her head, like a conductor getting ready to bring down the baton. Martha looked at the crowd. She saw the woman with the hand on her heart smile a little at the interaction. She saw the delivery man grin. They weren't impatient. They were waiting. They were enjoying the show, even the silent parts. Martha realized that it didn't have to be perfect. It didn't have to be a concert hall performance. It was just life. And in life, sometimes people have to help each other. "Okay," Martha said softly, a real smile touching her lips this time. "You can help. But you have to be gentle. And you have to listen." "I listen," Lily said proudly. Martha positioned her right hand over the middle of the keyboard. She decided to play a simple folk song, something that everyone would recognize. It was a tune that felt like home, a melody that was comforting and warm. She started to play. Her right hand moved smoothly, playing the notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but slower, more like a lullaby. It was simple, but under her touch, it sounded elegant and sweet. Lily watched her grandmother's fingers closely. She saw how Martha pressed the keys down and let them back up. Lily waited for a moment, finding the rhythm. Dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Then, Lily joined in. She didn't play the melody. She didn't know the notes. Instead, she began to tap on the high notes at the far right end of the piano. She used her pointer finger, striking two white keys over and over again in a rhythmic pattern. Ping, ping, ping. Ping, ping, ping. To a music teacher, it might have sounded wrong. The notes didn't match the key Martha was playing in. It was a little offbeat. But in that moment, in that plaza, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. The bright, bell-like tone of Lily's tapping floated like a silver thread over the deep, warm melody Martha was playing. It sounded like wind chimes blowing in the breeze while a cello played below. It was the sound of innocence mixing with wisdom. It was the sound of the future and the past playing together. Martha's eyes widened slightly. She adjusted her playing, making her chords a little softer so she could hear Lily better. She swayed along with the rhythm her granddaughter was creating. The pain in her wrist was forgotten. The stiffness in her back didn't matter anymore. They were making music together. It wasn't the music written in books. It was their music. The crowd seemed to lean in even closer. People pulled out their phones, not to scroll through social media, but to record. They wanted to keep this moment. It was too special to just let it fade away into the air. A young man in the back, maybe a college student, wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. The woman with the hand on her heart let a single tear roll down her cheek. They weren't just hearing a song, they were witnessing love. They were seeing a grandmother who had nothing giving her granddaughter everything. She had her time, her attention, and her art. Lily was beaming. She was so proud of herself. She was making music. She was playing just like Nana. She tapped the keys with enthusiasm, her little hand bouncing up and down. Martha looked at Lily out of the corner of her eye. The sight filled her with a fierce joy. It didn't matter that they didn't have a roof over their heads tonight. It didn't matter that their clothes were old and their stomachs were empty. Right here, right now, they had this bench, this piano, and this song. They had each other. Martha began to improvise a little. She played the melody slightly faster, matching Lily's energy. The music grew a little happier, a little lighter. It wasn't a sad song anymore. It was a song of hope. The contrast was breathtaking. The 87-year-old hands, worn and weathered by a lifetime of hard work, moved carefully on the low and mid keys. Next to them, the 4-year-old hand, chubby and smooth, tapped out a steady beat on the high keys. The visual was just as powerful as the audio. It told a story without words. The song went on for a few more minutes. Martha began to bring it to an end, slowing the melody down. Lily sensed the change in rhythm. She slowed down her tapping too, until she was gently pressing the keys one by one, letting the notes linger. Martha played the final resolving chord. It was a sweet, satisfying sound that seemed to hug the listeners. And right as the chord faded, Lily tapped one last high note, a ting that sparkled in the air like a star. Martha lifted her hands from the keys and let out a long breath she didn't know she was holding. She turned and wrapped her arm around Lily, pulling her into a tight hug. "You did wonderful, Lily," Martha whispered into her granddaughter's hair. "We make a good team." "We did it!" Lily cheered, throwing her hands up. For the second time that day, silence fell over the plaza. But this time, the silence didn't last long. Suddenly, a sound broke through the quiet. It was clapping. One person started, then two, then five. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding. It wasn't polite, golf clapping. It was loud, genuine cheering. People were smiling and whistling. The delivery man rang his bicycle bell. A few people shouted, "Bravo!" and "Encore!" Martha sat frozen on the bench, her arm still around Lily. She looked out at the sea of faces. They were clapping for her. They were clapping for them. She saw a man in a suit step forward from the crowd. He didn't look angry. He looked moved. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a bill. He didn't just toss it on the ground. He walked up to the piano and gently placed it on the music stand. Then he looked Martha in the eye and nodded with deep respect. Seeing this, others followed. A woman came up and left a $5 bill near the piano keys. Two teenagers who had been recording on their phones came forward and left some change. They were treating her like an artist. They were treating her with dignity. Martha felt tears spill over her cheeks, hot and fast. She quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. She looked at the money accumulating on the piano, but that wasn't what made her cry. It was the kindness. It was the connection. She looked down at Lily, who was clapping her hands along with the crowd, laughing because everyone else was clapping. Martha realized that they weren't invisible anymore. For a few beautiful minutes, they were the most important people in the city. And Martha knew, with a certainty she hadn't felt in years, that everything was going to be okay. The applause washed over Martha like a warm wave, but it felt strange to her ears. She was used to hearing car horns, shouting, or the harsh sound of security guards telling her to move. Hearing people clap just for her was something she hadn't experienced in decades. It made her heart beat fast, not out of fear this time, but out of a sudden, overwhelming surprise. She sat there on the bench, her arms still wrapped tightly around Lily's small shoulders. She looked out at the sea of faces. Strangers were smiling at her. Some were wiping their eyes with the backs of their hands. A few people were holding up their phones, recording the moment, but not in a mean way. They were capturing it like they wanted to remember it forever. The delivery man on the bicycle rang his bell again, a cheerful sound that made Lily laugh. The little girl clapped her hands along with the crowd, delighted by all the noise and attention. She didn't quite understand why everyone was happy, but she knew it was a good thing. "Thank you," Martha whispered, her voice cracking. She hadn't spoken into a microphone, but the few people standing close enough to hear her words quieted the others down. "Thank you for listening." A man in a sharp gray suit, who looked like he was on his way to a very important business meeting, was the first to step forward. He walked right up to the piano. He didn't look at Martha with the pitying look she hated, the look that said she was poor and helpless. He looked at her with respect. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded bill. It wasn't a single dollar. It was much more than that. He leaned over and gently placed the money on the music rack of the piano, right where Martha could easily reach it. "You have a gift," the man said softly. "Thank you for sharing it with us." Before Martha could even think of what to say, he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the flow of the crowd. That was the moment everything changed. It was like a dam had broken. Seeing the man give money, other people in the crowd started to move. They didn't throw coins at her feet, which would have made Martha feel like a street performer begging for scraps. Instead, they approached the piano with a gentle reverence. A young woman with a stroller stopped in front of them. She unbuckled her seat belt to reach into her purse, but instead of just grabbing money, she pulled out a granola bar and a juice box. She handed them to Lily. "For your energy, little one," the woman said with a warm smile. Lily's eyes lit up. "Thank you," she said, clutching the snack tightly. "Thank you," Martha echoed, feeling a lump form in her throat. The kindness was hitting her harder than the hunger pangs ever did. More people came forward. An older teenager, the kind with baggy clothes and headphones usually tuned out to the world, stepped up. He didn't have much, but he dug into his jeans pocket and pulled out a handful of crumpled bills and coins. He smoothed them out on the top of the piano next to the man's large bill. "My grandma used to play," he mumbled, looking at the ground. "She passed away last year." This was nice to hear. He looked up, and Martha saw that his eyes were red. She nodded at him, and for a second, they shared a connection. They both understood the pain of missing someone you love. The music had bridged the gap between a homeless woman and a young boy who lived in a very different world. The pile on the piano began to grow. Ones, fives, tens, and even a few 20s mixed together. It was more money than Martha had seen in a very long time. But as she watched the crowd, she realized something important. They weren't just paying for a concert. They were paying for a moment of feeling. They were paying because seeing the old lady and the little girl playing together made them feel something real in a fake world. A few people started asking questions. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" a woman asked gently. Martha hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to scare them either. "We manage," she said simply. The woman nodded, understanding what that meant. She reached into her bag and pulled out a card. It was for a local shelter, a nice one that had hot meals and clean beds. She tucked it under the edge of one of the money piles. "Just in case," she said. "They are good people there." Martha took the card and held it like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she said again. It seemed like thank you was the only word she knew anymore, but she meant it with her whole heart. The crowd was still buzzing, but the intense moment was starting to settle down. People were drifting away, back to their offices and their lunch breaks, but they left with a lighter step. The mood in the plaza had completely shifted. The cold, hurried atmosphere had been replaced by something warm and fuzzy. Martha looked at the money on the piano. She carefully gathered it up, her trembling hands smoothing out the bills. It was enough to buy a good meal. It was enough to get them a room in a cheap motel for a night, maybe two, where they could shower and sleep in a real bed with sheets. It was a miracle. But even more than the money, she felt a change in herself. For years, she had felt small and invisible. She had felt like a burden on the city, like someone who didn't matter. Today, sitting on this bench, she felt seen. She felt like she had value. She had given these people a gift, and they had received it. That meant she still had something to give. Lily was busy unwrapping the granola bar the woman had given her. "Nana, can we play another song?" she asked with her mouth full. Martha laughed. It was a dry, rusty sound, but it was a real laugh. "Not right now, my love. My fingers need a rest. And I think these nice people have to get back to work." Lily looked at the empty spot on the bench where the people used to be. "Are they gone?" "They are going back to their lives," Martha explained. "But we made them happy for a little while. And that is a good thing." Martha carefully packed the money into her purse, tucking it deep inside her pocket where it would be safe. Then she looked at her hands. They were shaking less now. The arthritis was still there, the pain was still there, but it didn't seem to hurt as much. The music had been like medicine. It had soothed the ache in her soul, even if just for a little while. She looked around the plaza one last time. The sun was starting its slow descent toward the afternoon. The shadows were getting longer. It would be getting cold soon. But Martha didn't feel the cold wind that was starting to pick up. She felt warm from the inside. She looked at the shiny piano. She ran her hand over the smooth wood one last time. "Thank you," she whispered to the instrument. She wasn't just thanking the piano for the music. She was thanking it for giving her a voice again. She stood up slowly, her knees cracking a little. She grabbed the handle of her heavy plastic bags. They felt lighter now, even though she knew they weighed the same. It was her heart that was lighter. "Come on, Lily," Martha said, reaching out her hand. "Let's go find something to eat. I think we can afford something special today." Lily hopped off the bench, taking her grandmother's hand. "Ice cream?" she asked hopefully. Martha squeezed her hand. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe even ice cream." They walked away from the piano, leaving it sitting alone in the center of the plaza. But it didn't look lonely anymore. It looked like a monument to a special moment. As they walked toward the edge of the park, people passing by still smiled at them. They weren't looking through them anymore. They saw the old lady and the little girl. Martha walked a little taller. Her head was up. She didn't shuffle her feet as much. She wasn't just a homeless grandma today. She was Martha, the piano player. She was Lily's grandmother. She was a survivor. And she knew, deep down, that no matter what happened tomorrow, she would always have this memory. She would always have the music. And as they stepped onto the sidewalk, blending back into the flow of the city, Martha began to hum. It was a soft, quiet hum of the song they had just played. The melody floated in the air around them, a gentle reminder that even in the hardest places, Beauty can grow if you have the courage to let it out. The sounds of the city rushed back in quickly as they walked away from the piano, but everything felt different to Martha. Before, the noise of the traffic and the crowds had felt like a wall she was banging against, something that wanted to push her out. Now, the noise just felt like life. It felt like energy. She held Lily's hand a little tighter, not out of fear, but to make sure this moment was real. They walked 2 blocks down the street until they found a small diner. It was a place with a big glass window and red booths inside. Usually, Martha would just walk past a place like this. She would look at the people eating burgers and drinking milkshakes and feel a sharp pain in her empty stomach, then keep walking. But today, she stopped. She patted the pocket of her dress where the money was safely tucked away. "Are we going in there?" Nana Lily asked, pressing her nose against the cool glass. "Look at the cakes." "Yes, love," Martha said. "We are going to have a proper lunch." They pushed the glass handle and stepped inside. A bell dinged above their heads to announce their arrival. The air inside smelled like fried potatoes and coffee. It was warm and smelled wonderful. Martha felt a sudden wave of nervousness. She looked down at her old dress and her worn-out shoes. She looked at Lily's messy hair and stained t-shirt. For a second, she worried that the staff would ask them to leave. She worried that they would look at them and say, "This isn't a place for you." A young woman with a notepad came out from behind the counter. She had bright red lipstick and a friendly face. Martha braced herself. But the young woman just smiled warmly. "Hi there. Table for 2?" she asked cheerfully. "Yes, please," Martha said, her voice soft. "Right this way. You can sit by the window if you like." Martha followed her, feeling a bit like she was dreaming. She slid into the booth. The vinyl seat was soft and bounced a little when she sat down. Lily climbed up on the other side, her feet not reaching the floor. The waitress handed them plastic-covered menus. "Take your time. I'll be back in a bit for your drink order." Martha opened the menu. Her hands were trembling slightly as she looked at the prices. It had been so long since she had the luxury of choice. Usually, her choices were what is free or what is cheapest. Now, she looked at the pictures of food. Grilled cheese sandwiches. Tomato soup. Chicken strips. And yes, a picture of a big bowl of ice cream with chocolate sauce. "What would you like?" Lily Martha asked. "Everything," Lily exclaimed, pointing at the colorful pictures. Martha laughed. It felt good to laugh. "We can't have everything, but we can have plenty." When the waitress came back, Martha ordered a bowl of soup for herself and a plate of chicken nuggets and fries for Lily. Then, she took a deep breath. "And can we also have one of those sundaes with 2 spoons?" "Coming right up," the waitress said, winking at Lily. While they waited, Martha looked out the window. People were rushing by outside, just like they were before. But Martha didn't feel like she was outside looking in anymore. She was inside, looking out. She was part of the world again. She thought about the piano sitting back in the plaza. She wondered if someone else was playing it. She wondered if the music had stopped the moment she left, or if the feeling of it lingered in the air like the smell of rain. She knew she would never go back to that piano. She didn't need to. She had proven to herself that she still had something inside her. She wasn't empty. The food arrived, steaming hot and smelling delicious. Lily clapped her hands and picked up a chicken nugget. She ate it quickly, closing her eyes in happiness. "Tasty, Nana. Eat slowly, little one," Martha said, but she was smiling. She dipped her spoon into the tomato soup. It was hot and savory, warming her all the way down to her toes. She hadn't had a hot meal like this in she couldn't remember how long. With every bite, she felt a little bit of strength returning to her body. Then, the ice cream came. It was a mountain of vanilla ice cream covered in hot chocolate sauce that was hardening into a shell. It had whipped cream on top and a red cherry. Lily's eyes went wide. Wow! Martha took a bite of the cold, sweet ice cream. The flavor exploded in her mouth. It was so sweet it almost hurt her teeth, but it was wonderful. She watched Lily take a bite, getting chocolate sauce all over her face. For a moment, all the worry about where they would sleep tonight, or how they would manage next week, disappeared. It was just a grandmother and her granddaughter sharing a Sunday. You know, Lily, Martha said softly. Today was a special day. Because of the piano, Lily asked around a mouthful of ice cream. Yes. Because of the music, Martha said. And because of all those people. They reminded us that even when things are hard, there is still goodness in the world. Lily licked her spoon. They were nice. They gave us money for food. Yes, Martha said. But they gave us something more important than money. They gave us a smile. They listened to us. Sometimes, that is the best gift you can give someone. They finished their meal, leaving empty plates and happy bellies behind. When the waitress brought the bill, Martha counted out the money carefully. She left a nice tip on the table, more than she usually would, because she knew how hard it was to work on your feet all day. Thank you, Martha said to the waitress as they stood up to leave. You come back anytime, the waitress said. You two have a good afternoon. Martha stepped back out into the afternoon sun. The air was cooling down as the evening approached. It would be dark soon. The reality of their life was waiting for them outside that diner door. They didn't have a home to go to. They still had the bags to carry. But Martha felt different now. She didn't feel the heavy weight of despair that she had woken up with this morning. They walked to a nearby park. It wasn't the fancy plaza with the piano, but a quieter place with big old trees. Martha found a bench that was somewhat sheltered by bushes. It wasn't perfect, but it was a place to rest. She sat down and arranged their bags around them. She knew they had enough money for a motel room, and she planned to find one nearby. They could have a shower and sleep in a real bed tonight. But for now, she just wanted to sit and breathe. Lily was tired from all the excitement. She climbed up onto Martha's lap and rested her head on her chest. I'm tired, Nana, she mumbled. It's okay, baby. You sleep, Martha whispered. She wrapped her arms around the little girl, rocking her gently. As Lily's breathing slowed down and she drifted off to sleep, Martha looked up at the sky. The leaves on the trees were rustling in the wind. A dog barked in the distance. The city was alive. Martha thought about the people in the crowd again. She wondered if they would remember her. She realized that she would probably never see them again. That was the way of the city. Millions of people passing each other, ships in the night. But today, their paths had crossed. And for a few minutes, they had sailed together. She looked at her hands resting on her lap. They were still old hands. They were still wrinkled and spotted. But now, when she looked at them, she saw a little bit of magic. She knew that music lived inside them. She knew that as long as she had that, she had a way to connect. She had a way to turn pain into something beautiful. The money in her pocket would help them survive for a while. It would buy food and a bed. But the music would feed her spirit forever. Martha closed her eyes and listened to the wind. In her head, she could still hear the piano. She could hear the clear notes she played, and she could hear Lily's happy tapping on the high keys. It was a duet that would stay with her always. A single tear rolled down Martha's cheek, but it wasn't a sad tear. It was a tear of gratitude. She was grateful for the piano, grateful for the crowd, and most of all, grateful for the warm, heavy weight of the sleeping child in her arms. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the grass. The city lights began to flicker on in the buildings around them. The world was preparing for the night. "Good night, world," Martha whispered to no one in particular. She wasn't afraid of the night anymore. She knew that tomorrow would come with its own challenges. The bags would still be heavy. The walk would still be long. But she had a song in her heart now. And as long as she had the music, she knew she could keep going. She would carry the melody with her, step by step, wherever the road took them. And somewhere, in the memory of everyone who had stopped to listen, the music was still playing.